Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We'll now have the parade of colors by the Combined Service Organization Color Guard, the posting of the colors by the Military District of Washington. Following this, please remain standing for the prayer for all veterans, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the National Anthem. We have the MDW colors. The special prayer for all veterans. Monsignor Roger Brady, Director of the Chaplain Service for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Monsignor Brady.
Eternal God, On this day made sacred by the heroic lives of our men and women of the armed forces, we rejoice in that freedom which each of us have been given. We have felt your loving presence while standing watch in the dark night silence at a lonely outpost, worlds away from home, or in a ship in a distant and hostile sea. We have felt your loving presence in the horrible heat of combat, or flying amid darkening clouds across your infinite sky. We have felt your loving presence as we ministered to our wounded and tortured comrades in their cries of pain, and among those whose earthly struggle has ceased. As you have been with us then, be with us now, to sustain our veterans for whom war has not ceased, but continues within their hearts and souls. Give peace to those who have known no peace, and patience and understanding to those who walk beside them. Let all who would forget war reach out in compassion to those who must always remember. May your divine grace be upon those who did not return home, and upon their families who still wait. May the nightmares of war cease, so that healing can take place, and then we can dream of peace, peace of mind and peace of heart. Then we begin to love those who harm us and forgive those who injure us, and go on with our lives with grateful hearts and renewed spirit. We ask this in your name, O Lord. Amen.
The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Colonel Barney Barnum of the Medal of Honor Society. Colonel Barnum.
In tribute to our grand and glorious flag, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, our national anthem. We are honored today by the distinguished guests. We can be seated, by the way. We are honored by distinguished guests who have joined us to honor veterans. We'd like to recognize many of them, and as usual, please hold your applause until we've completed these introductions. On the stage, and I'll ask each of these folks to stand. Mr. Richard Johnson, National President of the Paralyzed Veterans. Wave to him, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Gregory Reed, 2nd Junior Vice Commander of the Disabled American Veterans. Mr. Bill Baristow, National Commander, American Ex-Prisoners of War. Mr. Edward Blatt, National Commander of the Jewish War Veterans of the USA. Mr. James Smelcher, National Commander, Polish Legion of American Veterans. Mr. Patrick Mancino, National Commander, Catholic War Veterans USA Incorporated. Mr. Paul Spira, Junior Vice Commander, Veterans of Foreign Wars. Mr. Kenneth Wolford, Vice Commander, American Veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, the AMVETS. Mr. Lou James, President, Chapter 227 of Vietnam Veterans of America, Mr. Carl Foley, National President, Blinded Veterans Association, Mr. George Cunningham, National Commander, Army and Navy Union of the USA Incorporated, Mr. Charles Jackson, National President, Non-Commissioned Officers Association, Mr. Eddie Denz, National Executive Committee of the American Legion, Mr. Michael Tomsey, National Commander, Military Order of the Purple Heart, Mr. Lee Goldfarb, National President, Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, Mr. Francis Meekum, National Commandant of the Marine Corps League, Chaplain Herbert Cleveland, President of the Military Chaplains Association, Ms. Martha Lamart, National President of the Women's Army Corps Veterans Association, Mr. Charles Monges, National President, Legion of Valor, Mr. Wendell Phillips, Commander-in-Chief, Military Order of the World Wars, Mr. Jack Cotton, President of the Retired Enlisted Association, Mr. Norman Pearson, National Executive Secretary of the Fleet Reserve Association, Mr. Archie Hargett, National Commander of the Regular Veterans Association, Mr. Joseph Cleland, President of the National Association of State Directors of Veterans Affairs, Ms. Joanne Dana, National Vice President, Gold Star Wives of America, Ms. Jean Penfold, National Vice President, American Gold Star Mothers. Over to your left, the Honorable Les Aspin, Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Herschel Gobert, Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Sheila Woodnall, Secretary of the Air Force, General John Shalikashvili, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Honorable Norma Slatkin, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, General Merrill A. McPeak, Chief of Staff, United States Air Force, Admiral Stanley R. Arthur, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, General Walter E. Boomer, Vice Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, General J.H. Benford P. III, Vice Chief of Staff, United States Army, Rear Admiral Richard Applebaum, Chief Law Enforcement and Defense Operations, United States Coast Guard. Now, can we hear some applause for these very distinguished guests? We're grateful that all of you could be with us today. Isn't this a great day? You know, the weather cooperated. It's just marvelous. Each year, a member of the organization of the Veterans Day National Committee assumes responsibility for sponsoring our activities here. This year, that organization is the Congressional Medal of Honor Society of the United States of America. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society is, by its nature, one of the smaller service organizations. There are 202 living recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. All of them are considered members. The objective of the society, which is headquartered aboard the USS Yorktown at Charleston, South Carolina, is to foster patriotism through service. This year, the president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society is Major General Patrick Henry Brady, U.S. Army retired. General Brady was a major in Vietnam, commanding an ambulance helicopter. In just one day, he volunteered to rescue wounded men in enemy-held or fortified positions, many of them in dense fog and smoke. He accomplished his missions under intense enemy fire, which damaged 2 different helicopters. Here's a summary of just one day of Major Brady's work. Under enemy fire, he used 3 different helicopters in multiple missions to successfully evacuate 51 seriously wounded men, many of whom would have died without medical aid. For his actions, and this is really a brief summary, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Following service in Vietnam, he held progressively responsible positions in the Army, including that of Chief Mobilization Planner. He attained the rank of Major General. His last assignment before retiring was at the Presidio. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce the President of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society of the United States, Major General Patrick H. Brady. General Brady.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you. President Clinton, Secretary Brown, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and most especially my fellow veterans. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society is pleased to be here today, to be with our Commander-in-Chief, to be a part of this year's tribute to freedom, to the virtues of courage and sacrifice which paid for our freedom, and to honor those that embody those virtues more than any others, our veterans. Living and dead, they form a sacred alliance of those who have been blessed to have served and to sacrifice for freedom. They are a great treasure in America. They are the vault for our values. They formed and founded our values, and they fought for them. I really must say that it's nice to be remembered and to reminisce and to tell war stories today. But I think the most important thing about today is that our young people, they see the reverence that America has for her veterans. This is what really matters, that young people know that we care about and we care for our veterans, that there is nobility in being a veteran, especially in peace. For war will come again, and once again we will need to tap the courage and the sacrifice of our young people. And so to our youth, we want you to know that those you see as aging and maybe a little bit over the hill, they were young once as you are, but they exhausted their youth on liberty. Some never left the springtime of their life that liberty might grow old and prosper. Others spent their early time on the likes of Hitler, Kim Il-sung, and Ho Chi Minh, and on the worst devices of human nature, communism, fascism, and dictatorship. And now we are not so young, and many veterans spend their time on today's youth. Their success will be the true measure of our veterans' youthful sacrifices. We truly ache, we truly yearn for our young people to succeed. Young people should know that we are yours as mentors, for guidance, for all the resources left to us. You have them, and especially you have our most precious resource, our prayers. Veterans are grateful to be remembered, to know that our youth see and understand this remembrance, and that all Americans realize that today it is really courage and sacrifice that are on the altar. I hope that America will pray for her veterans today, especially those who are missing and may be POWs. God bless.
Thank you, and the Medal of Honor Society, General Brady. Now we have something special. This Veterans Day marks the 75th anniversary of the armistice which ended World War I. I asked World War I veteran Mr. Stanley Coolbaugh of Manassas, Virginia. He's accompanied by his son, Stan. He will accept on behalf of all the nation's 30,000 living veterans of World War I the United States World War I 75th Anniversary Commemorative Medal. I know that applause is for all World War I veterans. Let me tell you about Mr. Coolbaugh. He entered the Army in 1918, served that final year of the war on the battlefields of France. He went on to serve 2 more tours of duty with the Army, mustering out in Washington. He was a member of President Coolidge's Military Honor Guard. Since this commemorative medal was first presented in late August, the Department of Veterans Affairs has responded to more than 10,000 applications for the medal on behalf of living veterans. The medal bears 2 inscriptions. They came on wings of eagles, and a grateful nation remembers. Today, a grateful nation indeed remembers these proud eagles. Their dedication and pride is why we're here today and every November 11th. Our Commander-in-Chief, President Clinton, will present the medal. During the last presidential campaign, then candidate Bill Clinton promised that if elected, his cabinet would include a genuine veterans advocate as Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Those who've come into contact with VA's new boss will tell you without reservation that that campaign promise has been fulfilled. Since being sworn in on January 22, 1993, Jesse Brown has repeatedly emphasized that he intends to be Secretary for Veterans, not Secretary of Veterans Affairs. That distinction is meant to imply advocacy. In fact, it seems likely that if he had his way, he might shorten his title to one word, advocate. A Marine Corps veteran wounded in Vietnam, Secretary Brown spent 26 years on the professional staff of the Disabled American Veterans Organization, rising to become their executive director in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased indeed to present the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Jesse Brown. Secretary Brown.
Today, a grateful nation remembers its veterans, their service and sacrifices, their uncommon valor in war, their productive lives in a time of peace, and their continuing strong sense of duty and belief in the ideals of our nation. As we gather today in these solemn surroundings in recognition of the service of the men and women who have worn the uniform of our nation, we see strong, very, very strong evidence of the reality that peace is not merely declared, it must be made. Peace was made through the sacrifices of our veterans. Since World War I, over 700,000 men and women have made the ultimate sacrifice. Over 3 million have been disabled in service to our nation. As Secretary for Veterans Affairs, there is no doubt in my mind that President Bill Clinton understands and appreciates the magnitude of this sacrifice and the commitment that this nation owes to its veterans. He has shown consistently that he intends to be a president for veterans, sensitive to their needs, supportive of their feelings, and fully aware of their importance to our nation. I am extremely proud to introduce him to you, ladies and gentlemen, on this Veterans Day, a friend of veterans, a leader of our nation, William Jefferson Clinton, the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary Brown, General Brady, distinguished leaders of our veterans organizations, Secretary Aspen and General Shalikashvili, and the leaders of our Department of Defense and our military services. To all of you, my fellow Americans, today we gather to honor those who have rendered the highest service any American can offer to this nation, those who have fought for our freedom and stood sentry over our security. On this hillside of solemn remembrance, and at gravesides and in veterans' halls and proud parades all across America, today we join as one people to appreciate a debt we can never fully repay. Every American who ever put on this nation's uniform in war or peace has assumed risks and made sacrifices on our common behalf. Each of the 1.6 million men and women now in our forces today bears our common burden. This day belongs to all of them, to all who have protected our land we love over all the decades and now over 2 centuries of our existence. From the Minutemen who won our independence to the warriors who turned back aggression in Operation Desert Storm. It belongs to those who fell in battle and those who stood ready to do so, to those who were wounded and those who treated their wounds, to those who returned from the service, to friends and families, and to the far too many who remain missing. We honor our veterans on this day because it marks the end of the First World War. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, that crept an eerie silence across the battlefields of Europe, and 4 years of unbelievable destruction then came to an end. Today, on the 75th anniversary of that great war, it is fitting for us to recall and salute those from every service who contributed to the Allied victory, embodied today by the fine figure of Mr. Coolbaugh, who stood here and received this medal. Our victory in that war to end all wars was a great test of whether our nation then could reach out and become involved in the rest of the world. Many of the soldiers who fought in that war, including the man whom we honored here today, were born in another century, a time in which America felt secure on this great and vast continent protected by two oceans. We entered World War I knowing that we could no longer run from the rest of the world. But in the end, while that war proved our strength, it did not prove our wisdom. For within the span of a short generation after it, we neglected during a careless peace what had been so dearly won in a relentless war. We turned our backs on the rest of the world. We ignored new signs of danger. We let our troops and arms fall out of readiness. We neglected opportunities for collective security in our own national interest. We succumbed to the siren song of protectionism and erected walls against peaceful commerce with other nations. Soon we had a Great Depression, and soon that depression led to aggression and then to another world war, one that would claim 500,000 American lives. Now, once more, we stand at the end of a great conflict. The Cold War is over. The lesson America won in the Second World War led us to contain communism in the Cold War and led to the greatest peacetime victory the world has ever known, the collapse of the communist system and the Soviet Empire. Our long and twilight struggle against that expansionist adversary has ended. And even as the world marvels at this achievement, once again history is about to take the measure of our wisdom. Our generation is being asked now to decide whether we will preserve freedom's gains and learn freedom's lessons. We are being asked to decide whether we will maintain the high state of readiness that stood behind our victory or fritter away the seed corn of our security. Ask whether we will swell the global tide of freedom by promoting democracy and open world markets, or neglect the duty of our leadership, and in the process and in the withdrawal diminish hope and prosperity, not only for our own people, but for billions of others throughout the world who look to us. One of the greatest honors we can pay to our veterans on this Veterans Day is to act with the sufficient wisdom necessary to preserve the gains they have won through their hard service and great sacrifice. To honor those who served in Europe and Korea and Vietnam and the Persian Gulf in scores of posts at home and abroad, let us today resolve we will not shrink from the responsibilities necessary to keep our nation secure and our people prosperous. We also honor our veterans today by noting the outstanding service being rendered around the world at this moment by the most talented and the best prepared group of men and women who have ever worn our nation's uniforms. This morning I had the, thank you. This morning I had the privilege and the honor to host for breakfast not only the leaders of our nation's veterans organizations, but also 17 of the Army Rangers, Special Operations Forces, and infantrymen who recently returned from our mission in Somalia. Afterwards, I invited them and their commanders into the Oval Office where we sat and had a visit. I was profoundly impressed by them and by their service. Not enough of our fellow Americans know the real story of what happened during the terribly difficult firefight in Mogadishu on October the 3rd, a fight in which they demonstrated great ability, success, and unbelievable valor. During that raid, a Black Hawk helicopter was downed. Despite this setback, the Special Operations Forces conducted their raid with precision, apprehending 20 people suspected of involvement in the murder of United Nations peacekeepers in the Somali mission. At that point, they could have pulled back to safety, confident in the success of their mission. After all, what they had come to do was over. But they share an ethic that says they can never leave a fallen comrade behind. So, some 90 of them formed a perimeter around the downed aircraft in an attempt to retrieve the wounded and the dead. They found they could not dislodge the body of one pilot, but they refused to leave him behind. They braved hours and hours of the fiercest enemy fire. 18 of them ultimately perished. Over 70 were wounded. They exacted a terrible toll on their adversaries. Casualties 10 times as great, fatalities 20 times as great. I want to note their presence with us here today. I want to thank them, and I want you to let them know that we know they did their mission well, and that we are proud of them. Please stand up. Here they are. Please stand up. We owe it to them and to their colleagues to ensure that our forces remain the best trained, the best equipped, the best prepared in the world, and we will do that. We also owe those who serve in our nation's military the assurance that what they have done for us will not be forgotten. We owe to our veterans a health care system that is there for them when they need it and provides high quality and compassionate care. We owe to our veterans a measure of the security they have provided to us. And that is why earlier today I was proud to sign a bill which helps to increase the retirement benefits of our disabled veterans. And as we remember all of those whom we see today and those whom we can imagine who are serving for us or who have served, we must never forget those who were never accounted for. That obligation never dies until we know the whole truth. Just this month, we secured an agreement from the Chinese to return the remains of 3 American aviators whose cargo plane crashed there in the Himalayas in 1943. Our nation has a particular responsibility to pursue the fate of our missing from the war in Vietnam. On Memorial Day, I pledged here that our government would declassify and make available virtually all documents related to those who never returned from that war, and that I would do it by this day, Veterans Day. I can tell you that last evening, the Secretary of Defense completed that task. That promise has been fulfilled. I know that our government, our nation, together have a solemn obligation to the families of those who still are missing to do all we can to help them find answers and peace of mind. Every year, our humble words on Veterans Day can never do justice to the sacrifices made by our veterans, by those who returned and those who did not. by those who live among us today and those who live only in our memories. We know we can never repay the debt, but still we try because we know their sacrifices should be in our hearts every day. So on this day, let us simply repeat to America's veterans what is inscribed on the medals that have been awarded to thousands of those who served in World War I. A grateful nation remembers. Thank you very much.
Please remain standing for the retiring of the colors and remain until after President Clinton has left the amphitheater. We'll retire the colors. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.